So let's get underway today. Gonna be a Lizardmen against the dwarves with a nearly even troop count. I'm going for a rush style. It looks like for the Dowie there are 2 cannons. Now, looks like some shots coming into Krokgar and my Skink Priest of Beasts. Start off with. Gonna be trying to snipe out my heroes and some Kroxigors. I'll have to make sure that my engage is as fast as reasonably possible here. I do have quite a few Pterodon riders, and I'm going to see, where do I want to use my drop rocks? Going to be an important question. I'm thinking probably the blasting charges. Feels like the best idea to do that. And then I'll have my Saurus warriors hopefully collapse in on the front line. Kroxigors will be pushing in through. But you know what? I've changed my mind. Actually, no. Yes, I am going to drop rocks on top of the miners. And then I'm going to land my Pterodons on top of them so that they cannot throw their blasting charges as the front line gets engaged. That will also break their charge defense for my Kroxigors. And then I have another rock drop at the ready to, I guess, kill some Slayers, since they are the next biggest threat. So there we go, dropping that down. Gonna be about a third of their HP. Pretty good, nothing too crazy. But still, pretty good. My Skinks are going to be waiting along the sides, and they don't want to commit too hard. At least not until the blasting charges have mostly been used. Kroxigors will begin pushing in. And then my Pterodon riders, they're going to be... let's see here, who is this? Grombrindle. My Pterodon riders, they're going to be trying to stay a little bit safe, since I'll need some way to kill the heroes in the late game. That's not too difficult of a task here. Now my Skink Priest, he needs to be summoning some Manticores. That'll let me kill off targets like Grombrindle. And yeah, essentially that, Grombrindle and Gotrek. I'll also want my Skink fairly safe and far away from the action so that he doesn't get sniped out. And with the collapse in on the back line now, I'm feeling a little bit more confident, although Gorok has taken quite a bit of damage. I have to be a tiny bit wary of that. But with the current dwarf army, I think I should be fine, since the blasting charges are now gone. And I guess the main threats really are... let's see, what are the main threats? Usually it would be the ranged dwarf units, but in this build, there's no Trollhammer torpedoes. Instead, there is just a much heavier focus on infantry. But they will generally lose out in a long, grindy fight against Saurus warriors. Blasting charges help there, but they don't do a whole ton. Especially to Saurus warriors, just because they have so much HP. And given that I'm able to just really stay in a prolonged fight against the dwarves, I think I should be good. Still, I'll have to be a tiny bit careful with my lords and single entities, since in the late game that will be the major dwarf threat that I have to deal with. It's just that I have a pretty massive lead in infantry that I will be using to bog down the single entities in the late game. Manticore summon in the late game should be able to clear things out too. And not to mention I also have some Pterodon riders that will be quite useful here, as they can also pick off the heroes. The Slayers are going to be a bit of a problem too, but there's actually only 18 left, so no problem there. My Skink Priest, I pulled him in to save Krokgar, and now he's going to run away to make sure that he doesn't get sniped out. Now, taking stock of this late game situation now. We've successfully broken through the dwarf front lines. I still have 2 fairly healthy units of Saurus warriors, and the dwarves are without AoE. And this is usually a pretty clear sign of a victory for any army, when your opponent only has melee troops left. And I also have melee troops left, so the balance of power should pretty accurately reflect the situation of the game. There are still a bunch of single entities here that could be pretty threatening in the late game. Of course, Gotrek could heal too, but these red-crested skinks ROR, with their high damage and unkillable attributes, will be extremely hard for the hero squad to actually deal with. The Croxagores too, at full HP, are going to be quite threatening too. So really there shouldn't be anything that I have to worry about here. I guess I'm really just saving the Manticore summon to snipe off the heroes, and given that they're bogged down, I might as well throw that down now, especially since my Skink Priest might actually die here. I just want to get this out as soon as I can, and I'll be sending that in onto Grombrindle, since he's a little bit more threatening than Gotrek, as he does have that slow, and he also provides the leadership for most of the dwarf units. So there we go, Manticore is in, same with the Croxagores, and that should be it. There's a lot of Longbeards left, but they specialize in holding the line instead of doing damage, and I still have a lot of AP to actually finish them off. Grombrindle is now low on HP, should be dying in just a second, and even if he doesn't, I have multiple means of actually killing off the hero squad, so absolutely no worry here. It's just going to be closing out the game. Let's see, it will take a while though. My Manticore might actually die, but at that point it's just the unbreakable units left. And the win! Wonderful, wonderful. So, essentially most of the damage in this build relied on the blasting charges, but even the minor blasting charges didn't really get a ton of value. And if you look at the value of the dwarf infantry, they didn't hold up especially well versus my infantry. Although my Saurus didn't really pay for themselves, it is really the AP red-crested skinks that really carry here. The Croxagores too, being extremely tanky, can just run over the front line. And basically it. Although most of my troops actually didn't pay for themselves, it really was just the ROR red-crested skinks and my ability to flank into the back with them that seemed to work out. So this next match up against Spartan is up against the Bretonnians, playing as Greenskins. We are counting a lot of cavalry units. That's weird. I don't have a mini-map in the top right. I'm not sure why that's happening, but anyways, there's a lot of cavalry for the Bretonnians, and that's mostly their core. Just a lot of cavalry and Lewin. I don't really have to spread out this blob too much, since the archers won't be able to focus fire too strongly against them. And the goal is going to be punching through the front line so that I can disrupt the archers. My 8 peak loonies are going to be staying pretty far in the back line, just to stay as safe as possible so that I can get as many fanatic bombs as I can. And as long as the archers don't do too much damage, I should be in a pretty favored position here. The fact that most of the army for the Bretonnians is cavalry is a really bad situation for them, because my army is very hard on the anti-cavalry front. I have Black Orcs, Slows, and Fanatics all at the ready to provide a lot of pain against the Bretonnians. And as the cavalry charge in, I think I'm going to do that. I'll be sending in the Fanatics while shutting down the Bretonnian archers. And there we go, all the knights are at half HP. We'll throw down a big slow, pop a wall, and this should actually be a very decisive fight here. I'm going to go for Lewin, putting in as much damage as possible onto him so that I can fermented fungus him, and then chase off the rest of the archers. I even have some stone trolls on the sides I can move in. And that should basically be it. Lewin is now on the verge of routing off. I can even rampage him just to finish the job. And I think that's going to be a very decisive victory. Essentially just a huge Bretonnian cavalry blob in the center. Not really working out so well for the Bretonnians. They're getting surrounded by my infantry. And with Lewin out of the battle, they should be routing pretty easily, especially now that they are surrounded. I have a ton of skirmishers too. I did forget to actually send them to chase Lewin, but that's not really very important in this situation. As the skirmishers, they can just chase off any expensive cavalry unit that comes back, and my army really is just a little bit too hard to kill off at this point. As really, I think the 8-peak loonies just hard carried in that situation. Now, one thing that has been throwing me off this battle, though, is that the balance of power actually isn't showing up at the top, and my mini-map also isn't showing up at the top. So not sure exactly what's going on there. But I guess it doesn't matter too much. I'll just continue closing out this game. Finishing off the last of the cavalry, and now pushing the Bretonians to army losses. And there we go. A pretty decisive win. Geez, that was really brutal. If you do want to beat a build like this, you do have to bring a lot more archers, and you want to be avoiding the blob fight as much as possible. If you look at the 8-peak loonies, one fanatic bomb got 2,200 damage. So let that be a lesson to ye Bretonians. Do not blob up against them. That is really, really bad. The archers too, without the cavalry to defend them, got compromised. And then that basically sealed the fate of Spartan here. Usually instead you want to be using Lewin to give the AoE armor debuff so that your archers can do damage there. And I think we saw a game of that against one of my clanmates a while ago, where they quite easily eat a blob build like this. So here we go. It's going to be the Lizardmen up against the Empire of Hadres. Some cannon shots coming in towards my Pterodon riders. I do manage to dodge the first volley. The second one comes in and misses my Pterodons again. It's a pretty nice start for me. The goal is going to be rock dropping the front line so that I can break through into the back line and overwhelm the forces. But you know what? There's actually so much infantry here. I think it might be better to actually rock drop the handgunners instead. And that way I'll have the air dominance. And then the front line shouldn't be too scary, given that I have a source Old Blood and Wind Blast to tear things apart. I think that should be a pretty good plan. After the rock drops hit the handgunners, my Pterodon riders can go ahead and hit the Demogryph Knights. I should be feeling pretty comfortable. Volkmar moving in up against my Bastillodon, which can just charge towards him. Has really no fear, as the Bastillodon actually does trade fairly well into Volkmar. Going to get some Wind Blasts off against the Swordsman. A little bit misangled. I could have done a bit more damage there. But here we go. The frontline fight is beginning, which means that the Pterodon riders need to be flying in. And the goal is going to be shutting down these handgunners as quickly as possible. They can't take down all my Pterodon riders, so that should work out just fine. But the silver bullets actually getting in a pretty decent amount of damage. Some of my Pterodon riders actually very nearly routing off, but I'm still doing okay. As long as these guns aren't able to stay firing, I should be good. That's some nice micro from Hadres, actually avoiding most of the rock drop damage. But there we go, I'm able to throw down some of the rocks, and I think I traded out fairly well there. As for my front line, I need to make sure that my engagement timing works out well enough so that I can actually, I need to make sure that I'm actually engaging my front line and throwing down effective spells in this situation. As for all these handgunners, I really do want to shut them down as quickly as possible. I'll do that using the Bastillodon. And also, I'll try and sneak in some cavalry too, if possible. As for my Lord, he can probably dive in as there aren't too many threats here, and as the handgunners run off the field, I should be in a pretty good situation since I have Skinks at the ready to actually chase them off. More Wind Blast. to go down onto these halberdiers. Should do some pretty nice damage. And now the goal is going to be cycle charging the backs of the infantry to try and get them to rout. Handgunners are going to be getting shut down by the Pterodon riders. And for Saurus Old Blood, I'm just going to throw down some buffs on him. Make sure that he doesn't get killed off early. Looks like my cavalry has successfully defeated the Demogryph Knights too. And let's see, I think I should be good. I've essentially taken out all the major sources of damage for the Empire. I've chased off the handgunners, and I've also collapsed in the front line. Pretty nicely timed engagement. The Jade Wizard too is now down. And as long as I make sure I chase off these handguns, I should be good. I have a pretty nice air dominance situation here too. And cavalry also. So there shouldn't be really any reason that I can't chase things off. And really the last source of problems here for me to deal with is Volkmar, as he is still at high HP. Really though, the only thing that I have to do to make sure Volkmar doesn't kill me here is to keep my Lord alive, since he is my main source of single entity killing power. Killing the caster will definitely help too, as that will shut down any healing that Hadries could throw at me. And there we go. With basically all the forces now dealt with, the plan is to just finish off Volkmar. I can turn my Lord directly towards him, and a Wind Blast to take care of the spears will make it so that there's nothing really to defend Volkmar, and it's gonna be a win. Nice. So there was a lot to manage there. My commentating shut down for a quick second, as the important thing that you have to do in this type of matchup is timing. From what I've seen from my games against Falcon, the Pterodon engagement timing is extremely important if you actually want to pull out victories. I think it was a really good idea to go for the handgunners, and the fact that I was able to shut them down, at least most of them down, for a lot of the game seemed to have worked out quite well for me. I could have rock dropped the infantry, but there was so many of them, I wouldn't have actually pushed into the back line. Instead, directly going for the handgunners seemed to work pretty well, and after they were gone, it was just using the Saurus Old Blood to win out against Volkmar and our cavalry to kill the Demogryph Knights. So there we go, that's about it, and a win against Hadries, nice. But here we go, it is a Greenskins game against the Tomb Kings. The Greenskins versus Tomb Kings, and I'm up against Hadries and his Screaming Skull Catapults. Interesting. There are some Carrion in the sky and Necro Sphinx that I'll have to make sure I avoid until much later in the game. My skirmishers are going to be trying their best to snipe out any targets that aren't shielded skeletons, while my goblins take the flank. And yeah, as long as I can actually kill off these big single entities for the Tomb Kings, I should be in a pretty good situation. A nice initial volley onto that guy does a lot of damage, the Sphinx, but we're now seeing a lot of the Tomb King's forces revealing themselves now. With, let's see, Cetra coming in on his chariot, slamming into some orc boys. Now, I will be able to cycle charge the front line of the Tomb Kings pretty well, but my right flank might get overwhelmed. I'll have to be a little bit careful here. Some of my boar boys actually taking quite a bit of damage, but a nice counter charge coming in and a dive in on Cetra could very much change the situation here. He does manage to just barely escape though, but that's not too bad, as now the frontline fight is getting engaged, and I should be able to overwhelm the forces there pretty quickly. I have a bunch of buffs too from Skarsnik that I can go ahead and throw down. And I did lose my Goblin Big Boss, which things could go pretty dicey here if I lose my Lords actually. So I'll have to be a little bit careful there. But with the front line collapsing pretty rapidly for the Greenskins, I feel like should be in a decent situation. The Sphinx is getting in a lot of damage though, and my River Troll Hag is going to get chased off. So I'm going to actually disengage Skarsnik now, since it seems like I took a pretty bad engagement here along the right-hand flank. Still though, it looks like Skarsnik will manage to escape just fine. And with the Wa, the frontline fight should be collapsing. I'm going to eventually have my skirmishers do pretty well against the single entities too. And with a bit of focus fire, that should be able to solve most of my problems here. The front line now very nearly completely gone for the Tomb Kings. It's going to be a really nice situation for me, since that means that it will really just be the single entities left, and they are rather weak against the forces of my skirmishers, plus this much infantry. So to make sure that that outcome actually gets secured, I'm going to now move all my forces to commit to the frontline fight. And then after that, I'll figure out how to deal with the single entities later. The plan is I'll use my skirmishers to kill off Cetra. These necrotechs are actually healing up the Sphinx a little bit too much for comfort. And sniping out Cetra will do much better, since he actually can't be healed by the necrotechs. I have some goblin fanatics too that I can throw in onto these skeletons. So that's going to be the plan as I continue to group up my forces, bringing in the savage orcs against these single entities, and keeping Skarsnik close too so that he can give his anti-large buff. Let's see, Boar Boys are successfully shutting down the catapults. A really nice fanatic bomb should be coming down this way too. And here we go, we have reached the main engagement. Cetra getting caught up on my savage orcs is going to be taking a rampage on him, but it looks like that just barely doesn't trigger. It does trigger now though, and that will send him into a pretty rough situation. He's going to be taking constant fire from my archers, and Skarsnik will be putting in a lot of damage too. Hopefully I'll be able to kill him off and have enough savage orcs to actually win out the day, but Cetra is rather tanky, and he may be able to pull out on top in this situation. I'm going to rotate my archers so that they have a little bit of a better firing angle, and then pull back with Skarsnik just to make sure that he doesn't get absolutely murdered by the Necro Sphinx here. Some more shots just coming in right onto Cetra. He shouldn't be able to escape too easily in this situation. And with him nearly down, that should be a pretty nice situation for me, since most of my troops are anti-large, but the balance of power actually not in my favor. Seems like either there are some stealth units for the Tomb Kings, or I might be just mistaken here. But my archers are running out of ammunition, and that could pose quite an issue. I also don't have a ton of AP either, and with my savage orcs routing off, that could actually be a pretty bad situation. Cetra though is extremely low. He should be going down in just a second. Sending in some Boar Boys to dive in on top of him should be able to finish him off. And as soon as he's down, things should be looking up a little bit better for me, but I actually did lose a lot of my ROR goblins. It was pretty unexpected. Let's see here. Some of my archers too, actually in a bit of a rough position. Some carrion are coming back, so this actually could go pretty well in the favor for Hadries here if I'm not careful. Let's see, this Necrotech is in a little bit of a dicey position though, and I think I will be able to snipe him out with Skarsnik and his fermented fungi ability. And as for the Necro Sphinx, although it is quite scary, I think in the late game Skarsnik might be able to kill it too, as long as it doesn't get too many good hits onto him. Tomb Kings are running out of troops, but they still have quite a few left, and my ammunition is running quite low. I still have a few shots, but not a ton. So it really depends on how well Skarsnik does in this situation, I think, as most of my troops have broken. But with a pretty nice surround on the Sphinx and the Necrotechs, I think I should be okay. As long as I don't get a mass rout on my troops, there shouldn't be too much to worry about. And with a few volleys of poison too, that should negate quite a bit of the damage from the Sphinx. And there we go. Sphinx now getting into the final confrontation against Skarsnik. He is anti-large, so he does have a pretty nice matchup against the Sphinx. Also with all my infantry support, it should take quite a bit of damage here, as long as it doesn't get too many hits against Skarsnik. Some AoE, or actually really, yeah, the Tomb Kings don't have any AoE here, which is very useful, as it does allow me to group up with my troops. But a big rout actually coming on down for a lot of my troops, and Skarsnik taking a lot of damage. It looks like he might actually get killed off here, and if he does, I think that's going to be just barely a victory for the Tomb Kings. Maybe a misplay too, not going for that second Necrotech earlier might have caused some issues, but the game is not over yet, as the Necrotech does very nearly go down. Skarsnik does manage to successfully retreat. He will be able to come back, and with a lot of my forces rallying, I may just barely be able to kill off the single entities for the Tomb Kings. I also have a lot of poison to throw down too, and a good number of Savage Orcs also. I'm going to send in all my troops again onto that that Sphinx, and see if I'm able to pull it through. Terror routes could definitely be my downfall here, but with a big surround and a fermented fungi on the Sphinx, I should be able to get enough leadership going where I can pull out a victory. Fermented fungi can now go down. It's getting debuffed by a lot, taking a ton of damage, and with the leadership of Skarsnik, most of my troops won't be routing. So this is actually working out pretty well. Balance of power actually nearly getting back in my favor. I'm just hoping that the leadership of my troops doesn't suffer a massive break here. A big hit on Skarsnik would end out the game outright. So there's it's gonna be pretty close. But the leadership is actually quite high for my troops, so it shouldn't be a terror rout for most of them. And as long as they don't, actually, never mind. I might have spoken too soon. Quite a few of them actually begin routing off. Any troops that are about to rout, I'm actually going to disengage with them, just to make sure that they don't rout off, because that does give a pretty big penalty to many of my other troops. So we definitely don't want that. And instead, they're just going to be sitting in the back, providing leadership buffs to most of my forces. I've also positioned Skarsnik so that the Sphinx can't easily dive in on top of him. And if it does pull towards him, it will be taking a lot of damage from these Savage Orcs. So that should be good, but I'll have to be a bit careful. Skarsnik's gonna dance around just a tiny bit, since I really don't want the Sphinx to snipe him out. That would be almost an instant loss. And with that, I think I might have done it, but a sudden terror rout on most of my forces actually makes things a little bit scarier. The Sphinx turning to face Skarsnik too could actually dive in straight on top of him. But with my troops rallying from the terror rout, and despite of the bad moon finally coming back off cooldown, I think I might have just barely won out the game up against Hadri's. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. That was pretty close. That was pretty close. But I just barely managed to win it out. I took a really bad fight along the right flank in the early game, and the only thing that really pulled it back for me was the fact that Skarsnik was able to kill off the Necrotechs and many of the single entities there. The fact that he just barely lived too was hugely important, as we saw. And yeah, that's essentially what I needed to do. The Savage Orcs being able to fight the Sphinx for a really long time helped a ton too. Sniping out Cetra also was very important. And if I hadn't lost my single entities, I think this could have been a lot more one-sided for me, but oh my goodness, that was pretty scary. The skirmishers too were really important, and you can see here the these Arawar Wolf Riders getting 2,000 damage value. just from shooting the Sphinx. It's really important to have some skirmishers in your build, especially against single entities. So now up against Butcher Bird, the classic sniper on the Discord. He's coming in with Beastmen. I counterpicked with the Greenskins, and I'm going to start off with a little bit of kite against them. He has Malagor, the Dark Omen, coming in with no magic resist. I'm actually going to start Spirit Leeching him while I kite away with my skirmishers. Azag, you'll have to be a little bit careful about these Ungor Raiders, but that shouldn't be too worrisome. And as for the cavalry, I'll have to be a bit careful. These are Centigors, and they are rather scary and difficult to actually deal with. I definitely can win it if I do have Goblin Spear support, but given that there are actually Ungor Raiders here, block up my Goblin Spears, it seems like these Centigors could cause a little bit of an issue, but I do manage to get a pretty nice counter charge. I can also get a pretty solid Fanatic Bomb going over here too, and using that should be able to help out my frontline situation pretty well. Azag too with his Terror will help a lot at actually routing off many of these troops, and the right flank is trading about evenly. It may still go down though, so I'll definitely have to be a bit wary of that situation, since when that does eventually collapse, I could see many issues if the cavalry starts rampaging through my backlines. I definitely don't want my forces to get charged in the back, and that looks like that might happen here, but that's going to be a ways away, as these sides are sort of just trading evenly into each other. As for the left flank, it appears things are going fairly well. I threw down some AoEs with my goblins, and that has successfully routed off the Beastmen forces here, actually catching a few Centigors too. And with that, I'm feeling pretty nice, but there are still a lot of Razorgore herd left that I'll have to try and manage. The Razorgore herd, they can do a lot of damage by charging, and let's see. I think the best way to deal with them is either getting them to terror out by charging them in the back, or even sniping out the Beastmen Lord using Azag to try and break their leadership. This way, if the cavalry does try to cycle charge, they will likely get routed off. And with Malagor now nearly dead, I think we should actually start seeing quite a few routes for the Beastmen. You can see the leadership now falling quite rapidly, and I'm even going to sacrifice a few of my skirmishers here just to try and get those routes. Charging the Beastmen in the back, getting them to run, and buying me enough time to actually snipe out their lord. Once he's down, that should be it for the Beastmen, since their leadership can't really hold up against these large terror units like the Rogue Idol and Azag. And then I should be good. A nice decisive play, sniping out Malagor. And with that, you can see it's a mass rout for the Beastmen, and all I have to do at this point is chase things off. Army losses does hit 2, and that's going to be game. Essentially a lot of skirmish back and forth, but really just ending with a decisive snipe on Malagor, causing an instant rout for the Beastmen forces. The Rogue Idol too, I was actually a little bit slow on activating it. It really didn't get into combat until a bit late into the game. And for the cavalry fights, I think I did that pretty well. Essentially, I held up the flanks long enough for my front line to win, buying me just enough of a gap to snipe out Malagor. The next match is going to be Lizardmen again against the Empire, and this time it's going to be a little bit of a different build. Templehof Luminarch coming on in this game. Gonna be shooting up my dinos, surely. Marcus Wolfheart 2. Poking away at my troops, and these are Outriders. Very interesting. Best way to deal with them is to chase them off since while they run, they cannot turn around and shoot. So it's going to be as quick as possible of an engage. And then, yeah, then I should be good. The Outriders now running off means that my cavalry can come in to engage as quickly as possible. And oh my gosh, the Templehof Luminarch just nails those poor Outriders in the face. They take a ton of damage. And here's the plan. I'm going to send my Pterodon Riders to rock drop the infantry. And then I'm going to use that advantage to run over the infantry front with my own infantry. And hopefully just overwhelm the Empire forces entirely. I have a ton of cavalry at the ready to cycle charge and chase off troops. And without infantry, the Empire support should go down pretty quickly. I have a ton of Source Warriors that can just dive in onto these guys. And I think that should work out pretty well, but pretty scarily, I have managed to lose most of my Pterodon Riders. But it wasn't without a very nice trade. I have successfully broken through the front line, and it looks like the rock drops on the front line are going to be acting quite effectively here. Our Saurus Oldblood just barely throws down that his damage resist buff in time to avoid most of the heat that's actually coming his way. And that is why you take the Saurus Oldblood with that with the ward save. It is really nice if he gets netted down, and in a situation like this, it does just barely keep him alive. He will be able to rout off most of the troops, and now he can start going towards Marcus Wolfheart to snipe him out. There are a lot of guns still alive though, and I'm going to be using my Saurus Oldblood to stay away from them while having my infantry push back all of the guns. That's the general idea here, to keep my Saurus Oldblood alive, since he is getting focused down, actually taking quite a bit of damage, but I don't think it's going to be enough for the Empire. Most of the guns have actually gone down. The Luminarch is getting chased off by Saurus Warriors, and even if my Lord does die, I should still be just fine. A little bit of lag comes in, but absolutely no problem, as this game does get near its end. I've successfully shut down most of the range units now, which means my Saurus Oldblood is free to kill off the heroes here. He'll be sniping out this light wizard, and then moving on to Marcus Wolfheart to hopefully give him the finishing blow. A charge attack misses, but there's no more really, there's not a lot of range units to really support here anymore, and another hit should be able to kill off Marcus. There are a few huntsmen here that will likely kill off my Saurus Oldblood, but I also have my Bastiladon in the back ready to defend and cause terror where needed. The Empire forces have fallen, and with army losses on the way, I think I did just barely, well, maybe not just barely, I got a pretty decisive victory, essentially soaking a ton of damage with my Lord without actually losing him. It's really important to make sure you use your items effectively. He soaked a ton of damage when the nets came down on top of him. Taking a look at the win conditions too is very important. In previous games, or in my previous game against Hadri's, the Pterodons focused the range units, since there was so much infantry. But in this case, the infantry was pretty thin for the Empire, so rock dropping them turned out to work really well in my favor. They routed off almost immediately, and it let my cavalry just completely overrun the back line of the Empire. So there we go. So here we go, up in the next best of 3 now. I brought a Lizardmen build up against, or it's a Vampire Coast counterpick up against my Lizardmen build. I do have a Slann Lord who's a little bit susceptible to cannon shots. I actually missed the shots coming in, and he took some pretty crazy damage from the cannons off the get-go. I'll need to be a little bit more active with his dodging. to keep him from getting absolutely sniped out here. But as long as I can do that, I should be in a pretty nice situation. The goal is flanking the Vampire Coast, but they actually don't have too many bombers, which means I can really just instead go straight for the front line. There's a few gun units over here, but they don't do a lot of damage to infantry at far range. My lord, though, absolutely getting murdered by these carronades is not great for me. I could have been a bit more careful with them, but it looks like we're gonna have to try and win a game without our lord today. A huge misplay getting him killed off here. Some handguns actually getting some pretty nice damage against my skinks too. And it looks like my attack is getting thwarted pretty hard. My lord does get routed off. And he's dead. Oh my goodness. Looks like my micro on dodging cannon shots just not too great here, but it doesn't mean that it's unwinnable, since we do have our front line now converging. The goal, getting wind blasts onto these troops and just diving straight on in. There are some Lamprey's Revenge, not especially scary, and soon I should have my big dinos actually in on the fight in just a second. Luther, though, he is quite scary though, and he's actually going to be routing off a few of my troops at the get-go. As for my big dinos, they need to be pushing through to try and shut down all these troops. They're actually focus firing my Bastillodon, which is a very good engagement for me. And as for these Lamprey's Revenge, I have my red-crested skinks to shut them down. But can my dinos actually push through? I'll have to see. They're going to be trying their best and bouncing around as much as possible to really disrupt the Vampire Coast formation is going to be very important. I have a Source Scar Veteran too, which will be very important too for shutting things down. And as long as I can handle that situation, I think I should still be able to win this out. I have a ton of skinks at the ready, and Luther is probably one of the biggest threats that I have to worry about here. But he is definitely not unkillable. And hopefully I don't take too many losses by the time I clear out most of these Vampire Count's forces. I have my Source Warriors now moving in, and the Fleet Admiral is actually a little bit exposed. I can move in to try and snipe her out. As for these the gunnery mobs, I can shut them down using my skinks, and with most of the coast forces now actually getting routed off, I'm feeling okay. These red-crested skinks too are really good here, and as long as they don't die to these deckhand mobs, I should be fine. Some of the guns are still actually coming back online though, and this is going to be a little bit of a rough situation. Luther does manage to save the caster too, and it's looking like the Vampire Coast is probably going to be pushing through my front line here with with their summons. And as long as that caster lives, I'm going to be a little bit worried. Terror from Luther 2 is going to be especially effective against my forces, and with the guns now getting crossfire in the center, that will likely be game, but you never know. We could still pull off some miracles here. Caster getting pretty low. The front line slowly collapsing for the coast. I am able to shut down most of the guns, but it's just that a lot of them are still able to continue firing. That gives me a lot of worry. Caster 2, just barely alive, is going to be threatening until I finish her off, but I also have some skink skirmisher still alive to pressure down Luther, and hopefully they're able to do well. For my red-crested skinks, I'm going to try to loop them around to deal with the guns here. And it's still a little bit of a scrap. Let's see here. My skink skirmishers are still alive. A breath attack coming on my Saurus warriors that I think I can dodge. It looks like it gets cancelled. And let's see, I do have my Saurus Scar veteran back. He is going to be diving in to try and salvage this situation. Red Crested Skinks are doing well at shutting down the guns, but the Lamprey's Revenge, still alive, is definitely going to be a really big problem. I need my Red Crested Skinks to stay alive to actually kill them off. And it looks like it's just going to be army losses coming in for me. That's going to be a GG. And I think really just the biggest losser was, of course, my caster, who just died outright to some cannons. You can actually dodge the cannon shots. I've seen it done before. It's just in this case, I did not have enough practice with it, and it's very important to make sure that you're able to dodge them. Getting in no value, but even a single burning head I think would have actually won me the game there. But it comes with the matchup. As for my opponent, he did a really good job keeping those handgun mobs alive. I probably could have done better with my skinks to try and skirmish around the back. The red cresteds did pretty well. But the Saurus warriors, I'm actually not sure what killed them off. I think it was just the summons from the caster. And I could have, I think with my Saurus warriors, I'm not sure. My chameleon skinks too actually got a very low amount of damage. And replacing them with more infantry probably could have actually helped me out there. There's definitely a lot of stuff I could have done, but that's gonna be it for this Lizardmen build until the next time I play the matchup into the meta. But anyways, here we go. It's a greenskin build versus the Lizardmen. We're seeing Dread Saurian, the Slan Mage Priest of Life with some Saurus Scar veterans. There's a few skirmishers here, and that's about it. I don't have much of a front line, so I don't want to be taking that engagement too readily. And instead I want my cavalry to take to the flanks. My lord could... Let's see, what do I want my lord to do? I'm not entirely sure. I have a few spells that I could throw down, but the main threat here are these Saurus warriors. The question is, can I actually kill them off to dive in onto the salamander hunting packs, or will I be unable to do so? I think what I can do, first of all, though, at the very least, is get down some vindictive glares, fire in on the salamander hunting packs. It looks like it does miss entirely, though. It is pretty unfortunate, but not the absolute worst thing in the world. Just a little bit of wasted winds of magic. Salamander hunting packs are moving forwards, but the more thin the Lizardmen get, the easier I can actually dive in onto the front line here. My giant plus spider, goblin great shaman, should be able to do fairly well in the front line as long as I'm actually able to shut down the salamander hunting packs. And that's definitely no guarantee as I move into this game, trying to position my troops as effectively as possible. And you know what? I'm seeing a pretty good opportunity to dive in right now. So I'm going to do just that. I have enough cavalry to pretty easily dive in onto the back line. And if they can actually get in, that will be pretty good. But a little bit of a mistake. I get in range of the salamanders. They get a pretty devastating volley on my cavalry. But they do move up just a tiny bit, and I should be able to shut them down. My cavalry on the flanks can move in now too. And here is going to be the big fight. And as it gets started, I need to make sure that I shut down these salamanders as quickly as possible. The chariots will be distracting by shutting down the infantry, and as long as I can pull that off, I should be good to go. Let's see here. My giant getting in onto the action, the Dread Saurian getting surrounded, and I'm going to bog it down with infantry for a second before I move my giant in over to actually kill it off. I also have fanatics I can throw down to hit up these Saurus warriors, but a big AoE actually comes down, and I take a lot of damage on that front, but it looks like I'm actually winning this frontline fight fairly well. The Dread Saurian is now getting dived in on top of, and if I can take it out, that will be absolutely huge. I'm going to split up my boar cavalry that is engaged over here, and I'm going to use them to hit up the infantry instead. My other boar cav will be moving onto the left flank to try and support in that fight. And here we go. The main engagement up against the Dread Saurian. Will I be able to take it out? I'll throw down a slow over here to make sure that the Scar veterans can't come into support. And if I can take out the Dread Saurian, then I should be in the clear. But if it manages to kill off my single entity squad, that will definitely be a loss for me. So it's a little bit of a gamble since I'm not sure if I can actually win the fight. But given the damage that it's taken so far and the support of my cavalry, I think I should be just fine. My chariots will do really well at cleaning up the rest of the infantry, and with that, it should just be the single entities left of the Lizardmen. Just a few skinks here and there, some Sora Scar veterans that can't support the Dread Saurian, and look at that. It's going to be a lot of damage coming in onto it with all the AP cavalry and my superior single entities. It looks like I should be able to take out the win against it, even if it does kill my giant. That won't really be enough for the Lizardmen, but you never know. RNG could go either way, and I'll have to be very careful that I increase the odds of killing off that Dread Saurian as much as possible. AoE from this Slann too could really ruin my day. So making sure that my goblins and orc boys are spread out is going to be really important too. Some salamanders actually rallying too. I'll need to make sure I chase them off with my mobile units, and in general, that's going to be one of the focuses here. Actually, using my mobility to chase off any Lizardmen forces that come back. The Sora Scar veterans are more or less shut down. There's not much that they can really do to disengage from my boar boys, at least not for a little while. So I'm feeling pretty good there, and a few shots coming into the Dread Saurian too. Just a little bit of missile damage will go a long way against it. Slann Mage Priest of Life also nearly down, getting chased down by my giant, but he will just barely manage to live. And I do know that lords that just barely manage to live are prone to causing a lot of problems in the late game, but it might not matter if this Dread Saurian goes down, and it looks like it will with the final hit from my giant. Oh, but it looks like he staggers and just barely does not make contact. Nevertheless, Dread Saurian is now down, and it's going to be army losses for the Lizardmen. A pretty scary fight, but I think I took some pretty nice engagements there. It was a complete surround on the Lizardmen forces, and from there my single entities had enough support to win out the game. A shaman and the giant did very well. Dread Saurian paid for itself too, but if you look at the salamander hunting packs, you can see how my play was effective. I shut them down really quickly. They only got a single volley off, and from there I had the single entity fight in hand. Sora Scar veterans on foot weren't really able to support, and from there it was a pretty straightforward win. Now, here we go. The next game is gonna be up against the Tomb Kings, a fairly small Tomb Kings force actually. Actually opting for a rush. Pretty scary for me. Their front line should fall fairly quickly to my Poison Wind Globadiers though. And I also have a ton of guns to shoot down any chariots that try to make their way towards me. There aren't enough Nehekara horsemen either to get past my spears in the back. So as long as I micro those guys well, I think I should be just fine in this situation. Some of the horsemen actually getting in range of the Jezzails, but diving out as soon as they can. I still should be able to get some pretty nice shots on them though. So I'll just be firing away and hopefully taking out a few models. Actually doing quite a bit of damage on the get-go. The next goal is going to be these... Actually, you know what? I don't really need to focus the skeleton archers, as I do have my Globadiers at the ready. Rattling guns are going to be focusing along the right flank, since you want your guns to actually be focus firing in this situation. And with the skeleton archers moving up, I might actually be able to snipe a few of them out with my Globadiers. That will be a very nice trade, and they don't do a lot of damage either to my weapon teams, since they have so much armor. So that should work out pretty well. Cetra too, getting a little bit close to my Jezzails, might even take a few shots from them, and that would be very good for me. As for the front line, some Nehekara horsemen are actually diving on in. I'll hit them with one volley of Globadier fire, and then that should be a pretty effective trade for me. Actually taking out a few models of horsemen, getting in some pretty good damage along the way. Cetra is able to dodge most of my Jezzail shots, but with the Yeah, I still have some pretty good ammunition. That's not too much of a worry. Some forces here are actually trying to dive through my lines, but I have a bunch of spears at the ready, and I should be able to hold fairly well against that. A big engagement from the Tomb Kings now coming in, though, and we'll see how this goes. This will be the main engagement, probably, and it really depends on if I'm able to actually stop up the forces of the Tomb Kings. Their infantry is lagging behind a tiny bit, and Cetra is in a little bit of a scary position. He might actually get killed off here if I manage to pull down a net on top of him. And I've also managed to shut down most of the chariots using my guns, which is definitely very big. Cetra 2 now, actually trying to push through my lines. I'm going to throw my Deathmaster Sigil on top of him, send in Snickage and the Assassin, and begin gunning him down. He'll be taking a ton of damage, and without really the infantry to support for the Tomb Kings, they're going to be having a little bit of a rough time in this fight. Cetra getting pretty low, getting a hit from Snickage too, is looking pretty rough, and the combined guns fire should be able to take him out. Still though, he actually does make it out alive, but it's absolutely no biggie, as he doesn't have a ton of healing, and he will go down eventually. There are still 2 Tomb Scorpions though that I'll have to worry about, and with many of my guns compromised by chariots, I'll have to be a tiny bit careful. Good thing for me though, the archers have still taken a while to actually come in and engage. One of the chariot units is now gone, and my Plague Priest is still alive too, and it's actually pretty proficient when it comes to dealing with single entities. So hopefully it works out pretty well. I'll even throw down a summon too, just to chase off these skeleton archers. And now I can use my heroes to actually kill off the Tomb Scorpions. Snickage and the Assassin combined will do fairly well in that situation. And the Bell can take out the other Scorpion. Cetra at this point has taken too much damage, or he's no longer a huge threat as long as I have Snickage on the battlefield. So with all that in mind, it should just be closing out the game now. But things could still definitely be a little bit precarious. Many of my guns are still getting compromised by these Scorpions. The only blessing for me is the fact that the necessity for guns is a lot lower now, just because I have a very strong single entity core, and most of the chariots for the Tomb Kings have actually fallen. You can see here, Snickage and the Assassin are very strong against the Tomb Scorpions, as long as I'm careful, and as long as they're taking fairly safe engagements. As for the Tomb Guard, they'll be falling to my rallying Poison Wind Mortars, and they shouldn't be too much of a problem. And Cetra, now coming on in, is going to get netted down, and he will likely be falling to Snickage here. A previous threat before, because I didn't have any single entity killers, now not too much of a threat, since he can't really get in close. He does manage to escape, but his HP is now extremely low, and with the final Tomb Scorpion falling, that's going to be most of my guns actually secured on this hill. And from there, I should be good. The Tomb King's front line is falling. I do only have 2 Poison Wind Mortars left, but they aren't too important here. There's a few Skeleton Horsemen alive too, but all in all, there's not a lot of threats left for the Tomb Kings, especially now that the Horsemen are gone. And as soon as I can find a good position for my guns to set up, then I should be just dandy. Let's see here. Yeah, there's just a bit of infantry left, but the Plague Priest can probably solo everything that's left for the Tomb Kings. Absolutely no problem. Unless there are hidden units, like maybe some reserve stalkers, but I don't think so. I am out of Poison Wind Mortars though, so there is a lot of Tomb King's infantry to actually finish off. And this map is actually really bad for my guns. They've been having a pretty hard time finding a good position to set up. And also, a new Shopti summon coming down on top of them. I completely forgot about that. That's going to be getting in some pretty nice damage against my guns. But I don't really need guns left at this point. There's no more Tomb Scorpions. Cetra is at very low HP. And Snicketch plus the Assassin are still at very high HP values. Cetra does manage to dive in onto my guns, actually pulling away, but the Ushopti can finish the job. But even at this late stage of the game, I still have a Rattling gun and a unit of Giselles. This is just really the strength of the Skaven, where they are able to continue rallying even when you shut them down. And there we go. Cetra, taking a ton of damage, will be out of the battle in just a second. The archers for the Tomb Kings now falling, and even the summoned Ushopti falling too, due to army losses. So there we go, holding off a rush from the Tomb Kings with a little bit of effort. It got pretty scary once my guns actually got compromised, but the Giselles are really hard to take down. The double Tomb Scorpion, probably the biggest threat in this situation, got bogged down by my spears and killed off by Snicketch and the Assassin. Though I think this build is probably one of the scarier builds against my Skaven style. Thankfully for me though, there were quite a few units of Tomb Guard, and the engagement timing was a bit off. If the Tomb Guard had actually been advancing into my infantry, things could have gone a lot differently for the Tomb Kings, but instead I had a lot of time to focus down the chariots and single entities that game. So there we go. I'll just do a quick hover of the damage values for anyone who is interested. And I'll move on to the next game. But here we go. It is the Lizardmen against the Greenskins. Black Phillip actually counterpicked himself, but presumably that means that he has a build to actually counter what I have going here. And what I have going is going to be a kite style of play on a very small map. Could turn out to play out very badly in my favor. And it's going to be a lot of goblins on the front line, actually diving right in onto my forces. A lot of skirmishers too. And this Arachnarok spider charging in towards me, being pretty scary. Let's see here. My javelins are getting in a lot of damage though. It summons some spiders. And as for Mazdamundi, he should be able to deal with that left flank while I deny a fight on the other flanks. We managed to rout off a few goblins, but that's nothing huge, especially given that it is just a just some units of goblins. And the kite begins. I'm chasing off some units where I can with my cavalry, trying to keep my Bastiladon safe using my skink skirmishers, and just taking picks where I can. The Carnosaur is going to try and rout off this second unit of goblins now. And the Solar Engine I want to keep alive for the late game. The cavalry will have to perform very efficiently here. They actually want to be winning the game for me, since the cavalry is the main source of actually chasing off troops of the Greenskins. So that's going to be a little bit scary. My Bastiladon does get caught, but that's not an absolute huge loss, as it's not very important against this Greenskin build. Let's see here. Some of these Goblin Skirmishers are taking some pretty nice damage from my Skink Skirmishers, which is a great trade for me, although some of them actually do get charged by some Spider Riders, and that's going to be hurting just a tiny bit. My cavalry too, actually taking quite a bit of damage. And my retreating forces too, trying to retreat from these black orcs, are not going to be having a great time. I have to sacrifice a few skinks to actually do that. But it's not the absolute worst situation, since I'm trying to pick off key targets for my opponent. And yeah, I'm trying to pick off key targets to secure a win condition. So I'm okay losing some skinks, since they're not going to be very important in the late game. Some more skirmishers for the Greenskins now are getting routed off. I will be losing my Bastiladon though. Looks like it just got caught up a tiny bit and will be falling. But I've chased off another unit of skirmishers. I can net down this unit here and chase off these goblins too. That will secure me the mobility advantage for this game. And then the goal is going to be actually killing off the blob for the Greenskins. I don't have my solar engine, it will be getting chased off, but I have Mazdamundi and the Carnosaur. And with some cycle charging, they can probably kill out the Arachnarok Queen. And of course I have a bunch of Skink Skirmishers too that can also do that job. So I'm going to bring them on in. Hopefully get a pretty good net here too. And that should work out pretty well for me, but the net is on cooldown. So that's going to be a little bit scary for me. But if these Black Orcs actually clump up, I should be able to get some pretty solid AoE on top of them. The Goblin Skirmishers do actually die off, charging into my Skink Skirmishers, and I shouldn't be taking too much damage on that front. Some AoEs now are going to get thrown down, and that should be a huge pick for me, as the Black Orcs are going to take a lot of damage, and having to disengage too, definitely very good. The Carnosaur can get a free charge in on the Arachnarok Queen, but actually controls stopping my Carnosaur, may actually get it caught up, but it just barely manages to escape. A pretty scary situation. A little bit of a misplay by me, but I managed to pull it back together, and the Carnosaur does manage to escape. So that's very good. Some more Black Orcs sort of just clumping up in this situation, and I'm going to throw down a net to try and pin down that Arachnarok Queen. It actually does manage to make it past the net. My Carnosaur does get rampaged, but a heal on top of it and a charge onto the Arachnarok Queen that should actually get quite a bit of damage onto it. And if I can take out the Arachnarok Queen, that will be a huge boon for me, as after that it's essentially just the Greenskins infantry left. So getting in some really nice damage. Hopefully I'll be able to get it routed off, but that's definitely no guarantee. I have some cavalry too that needs to be converging back onto the center of the map. And there we go. I can now disengage with some pretty nice damage on the Queen. I have a few Skinks that I'm going to send in to sacrifice their lives for Sotek. They're going to be stalling out the Greenskins as best as possible so that I can secure more charges with my Feral Carnosaur. Going to loop around and try to go for the Queen. Mazdamundi will be getting chased by a few of these Swamp Things, but that's absolutely no problem, as the Swamp Things, they don't do too much damage, and I should be able to disengage from them fairly easily. A few Night Goblin Fanatics here coming in too are going to be rather easily taken out by my Skirmishers. And that's essentially the name of the game now. I've successfully chased off all of the Greenskin mobile forces, and they're just going to be getting skirmished out into oblivion, essentially, as they really have nothing that can catch my forces. Mazdamundi is still doing very healthy. I have tons of time to heal up the Carnosaur, and now the killing blow. My 4 Skink Chameleons are going to dive in and focus fire this Arachnarok Queen. After it goes down, it's just going to be a few Black Orcs left. Absolutely no problem. It should be a victory, but a few of the Goblin Skirmishers do manage to come back. I'll need to find a way to deal with them. The Arachnarok Queen actually gets a little bit out of position, which allows me to go ahead and focus fire it down. And that's going to be an absolutely huge pick for me, since that's going to be the last source of terror for the Greenskins. Well, I guess the Swamp Things also cause terror, but that's the last single entity going down for them. I can throw down a heal onto my Carnosaur too. And there we go. The single entity fight has now been won by me. That's the mobility and the single entities done. It's Mazdamundi and a Carnosaur. We have a ton of AoEs, and with the balance power now switching in our favor, that's gonna be it. I just have to carry out the win with a few AoEs, and I don't even have to kite at this point since we've established such a large lead in this situation. Although the Carnosaur does take a bit of damage, I'm going to disengage with that. And just to make sure I don't accidentally throw the game to Skarsnik here, yeah, I'm going to be disengaging. Still though, these Black Orcs have put themselves in a pretty rough situation, with another ruination of cities coming down on top of them. We'll be killing many models. And I also have my Skink Chief too, who can snipe out lords. I'll turn off fire at will with him, in case I need him in the late game to kill off Skarsnik. And there we go. Swamp Things nearly routed off. There's only one more unit of Black Orcs. And let's see, I have another unit of cavalry too that can cycle charge also. So definitely tons and tons of win conditions here that I can pull to get a victory. A nice charge on the Black Orcs will get them routed off. Mazdamundi can focus fire this River Troll Hag. And there we go. Mass routes from the Greenskins. It's just Skarsnik now. And that should be it. Pretty clean victory. It got a little bit dicey. In some parts of the game, I had to sacrifice a few of my troops. But in the end, the Greenskins, they just couldn't really catch my forces. I had free reign to cycle charge as soon as I routed off all these Spider Riders. And the Arachnarok Queen, although still good, its summons got shut down a lot of the time because I was keeping my skinks near my chameleons. Looking at the values here, my cavalry did okay. Carnosaur did pretty good. Mazdamundi did pretty good. It was really the solar engine that didn't pay for itself. In the future, maybe I don't really need the solar engine, but it's really good in some situations if you keep it alive. But still, I might consider cutting that for a little bit stronger kite. Oh boy, let's see. Just some quick hovers. Okay, there we go. For the last, or for what might be the last game of today, I'm up against the Tomb Kings again, bringing in a heavy cavalry force with Grom the Paunch to try and work as my duelist against the Tomb Kings mobility. Let's see, shots coming in from the artillery hits up my very expensive cavalry at the start of the game. It's going to be a little bit unfortunate, but this is a fairly defensive Tomb Kings build. I can actually play pretty aggressively here and essentially just charge straight on in. My skirmishers will counter his, and there are a few Tomb Guard, but I have my Goblin Fanatics to deal with that situation. My caster will be doing a ton versus the front line too, and I'm even going to use Grom to shield away this front line. He's just going to dive, to shield away the skirmishers. He'll just be diving in straight onto that. My cavalry, they'll be moving in as quickly as they can, but not engaging before my other forces do. One of my Savage Orcs does get routed off. Grom gets in a little bit of a scary position, but he does have Lucky Banner in case things get too hairy. And soon enough, I should be able to dive in onto these Ushabti Great Bows too. I have my Goblin Hero at the ready to support also. And here we go. Diving straight on in. The Kemrian War Sphinx actually goes straight for my forces, and I'm going to actually surround it with some big guns. And as long as we don't take too much damage from the artillery, that should work out pretty fine. Grom successfully chasing off many of these skirmishers too, and I'm getting pretty nice damage on this War Sphinx. So the goal now is going to be casting spells onto the Tomb Guard, shut them down, and throwing down a few fanatics to kill off the Tomb Guard where I can. My Boar Boys will just be cycle charging and pulling out as soon as they can, and my skirmishers are going to go for exclusively that War Sphinx. A few more casts of magic should be able to rout off most of the Tomb King's forces. The War Sphinx is taking a lot of damage, and there we go. That's a pretty nice cast. And my fanatics too, and I guess they can throw some fanatics this way onto the Tomb Guard and then dive in onto that Casket of Souls, which actually is now focusing my cavalry, getting in really scary amounts of damage. But I don't think it's going to be enough. I think I should be able to pull out the victory here. My cavalry is going to be sweeping around the back now to try and kill the Ushabti Great Bow. The Casket of Souls is actually caught up, interestingly enough. And I should be able to snipe him out. As for this Necrotech, I have my Goblin, who should be able to handle that situation fairly well. And Grom, he successfully killed off, or at least mostly dealt with the War Sphinx. And AoE does come down, but I can dodge that. And the goal right now is to shut down the range units of the Tomb Kings. They'll be doing a lot of damage to Grom that I definitely do not want to be taking. And as soon as his lucky banner is gone, that damage is going to be extremely punishing. So focusing down the Ushabti is going to be hugely important. As for Grom, he's fairly comfortable here fighting up against the Sphinx. Although he's actually taking a bit of damage, so I'm going to pull him out. And instead give him a better matchup to face up against. As for all this Tomb King's cavalry, I have a lot of AoE that I can cast with my Orc caster, my Orc shaman. And that should be able to swing this fight very heavily in my favor with a huge amount of value still on my cavalry. And that should be it. The Tomb Kings don't really have a ton of forces left to really handle all my cavalry. A little bit of cycle charging should be able to do good, and the fact that Grom is here too is going to be doing a lot. Grom is almost unkillable at this point, since the Tomb Kings have no more Necro Sphinxes. So I should be fine as long as I don't hit any unfortunate army losses. Potap 2 will be going down, and even a big AoE hitting up a lot of his own infantry is going to be pretty well, going pretty well in my favor. I'll throw down some debuffs on him with my Goblin Big Boss, and that should be the end of Kotep, while the Ushabti Greatbows are still occupied. It was a very nice choice to send the Savage Orcs over to go ahead and chase them down. And here we go. Kotep very nearly going down. A lot of Tomb Guard have clumped up on Grom, which would be bad, but that AoE coming down is going to be putting in a lot of damage on top of them. And the Ushabti crumbling too is going to be an easy, a pretty clean win. Although I did get a lot of losses on my cavalry. Essentially, I killed off all the important targets except for the infantry, just because the infantry weren't especially scary in this situation. Another AoE does come down, but misses most of my troops. And with Kotep falling and Grom still at half HP, once again, I think this should be a pretty clean win. Still, the Ushabti are able to fire, and I still want to dodge with Grom. If he gets accidentally sniped out, I could just get a pretty bad loss. Since the Tomb Kings, with their undead leadership buffs, can cause mass routes on your troops. So actually making sure that your leadership is still high is going to be very important. In fact, most of these forces actually breaking off. A little bit unfortunate, but it doesn't really matter, as I do manage to pull out the victory. The Ushabti are going down. And yeah, CF Bomber saying I shut down his cavalry pretty early on. Couldn't even fire onto my front line. Indeed, the Savage Orcs managed to push through, and I think the targeting with Kotep was a little bit bad too. Kotep, he should have really been focusing the Kotep really should have been focusing the Savage Orc big guns instead of just the normal Savage Orcs. Because of the sort of mistargeting, a lot of my very elite infantry managed to make it to the front line, and that ended up being pretty rough with poor old Tomb Kings today. And there we go. GG, Kotep getting in some pretty nice damage, but not enough. See my Savage Orcs, at least one of them managed to make it to the fight. The other actually didn't really pay for themselves. The Fanatics, however, did really well. I'm not sure what they were killing. And if I had actually been able to get some good Fanatics off with them, they could have even paid for themselves even more. The Ushabti got shut down since I was rushing, and I think I handled the game mostly well, although of course I could have played it better. But so far I'm liking the heavy cavalry build from the Greenskins. It seems to work out pretty well, and it can punch through the Tomb King's front line pretty easily.